who is in Leeds. Good morning.
Morning, Sarah.
Now, we were told in the summer that Jeremy Corbyn reportedly said that he would be Prime Minister by Christmas. It doesn't look as though that is likely to happen. Will he be in number 10 by next Christmas, do you think?
Well, who knows? All we can say is that we're going to be ready for another general election where it is going to take place, but we're also ready to go the full course if that needs to be the case as well.
In order to be ready for an election, it will be important to have a very clear position on Brexit. And in fairness, Labour's position there has been some clarity in the last couple of weeks over that. And it appears that the party wants to stay much, much closer to EU rules and regulations than the Conservative Party is advocating.
Well, what Labour wants to do is reach a position where we have a good relationship with the EU post-Brexit, because Britain is leaving the European Union. Labour respects and accepts the outcome of the referendum. And we want a post-Brexit Britain where the economy and jobs is put first, not fixated on structures. That's the end goal we want to reach, where Britain has a good trading relationship with the EU, a good relationship with the rest of the world, and where we protect jobs and the economy, but also protect workers' rights, environmental protections and consumer rights as well.
Now, of course, the Tories would say they're interested in all of those things too. There has to be a structure around this when we have an end-state relationship with the EU. Is it fair to say you want a much closer relationship than the government is arguing for?
We've set out the vision of what we want in terms of Britain post-Brexit. The problem that Theresa May's got in negotiating that outcome, and it is for her to negotiate it, is at the same time as negotiating with Brussels, she's got to negotiate with her backbenchers in an extreme caucus within the Conservative Party that are ideologically fixated on structures, ideologically fixated on the ECJ, and that really has weakened her, as we saw in Parliament just a few days ago.
But we're going to have answers on these questions. And if you say you're ready to form a government within the next year or so, before we leave the EU, Labour needs to have clear answers on these questions about whether or not you would ever accept a continuing role for the European Court of Justice, for instance.
Well, we see it as common sense that the ECJ should play a role in the transition period.
But after the transition?
And we're open-minded about that, because any trade deal, any deal needs a court or some other institution to oversee and protect that deal. That just seems to be common sense.
Tom Watson has said this morning that he wouldn't rule out a second referendum on Brexit. And actually, Jeremy Corbyn in Lisbon a few weeks ago said something very similar, that he didn't want to rule it out. Would you be in favour of a second referendum?
Well, Labour isn't calling for a second referendum. We accept
just
and respect
this morning,
the
Tom Watson
referendum.
has said he wouldn't rule it out.
Well, of course, it could be the case that Theresa May caves in and starts to ask for another referendum. I very much doubt she'll do that. So we're not in government. Many of these things are hypotheticals. But I can say clearly, we're not arguing for a second referendum. And I think that Dan Abbott made that clear on the BBC on Andrew Marr earlier today.
Whatever the end relationship between the UK and the EU is it important to you and important to Labour that we see lower levels of immigration from the European Union in Britain?
We want to put the economy and jobs first, and you will listen to the CBI and actually listen to the public sector as well, in the NHS, for example, and in the care sector. They're clear that the role that EU migrants have played and are playing is essential to growth, essential to the private sector, but also essential to our NHS as well.
That sounds like you don't want lower levels of immigration after we leave the European Union.
We want to put the jobs and economy first. We want fair and reasonably managed migration. Free movement, as it is, will end when Britain leaves the European Union, and we'll need a new arrangement that's fair and reasonably managed in terms of migration. But we want to put the jobs and the economy in the public sector first. The Conservatives have a bad track record of making headline-grabbing false promises on immigration targets and always failing to meet those promises. We don't think that's a good way of doing politics.
Now, you're an enthusiastic supporter of Richard Leonard, the new leader of the Scottish Labour Party. You've called him an inspiring socialist in the past. Are you hoping that the UK Labour manifesto will copy some of his rather more radical ideas?
Well, it's for the Scottish Labour Party to decide the Scottish Labour Party policy.
Of course, I'm asking if you want to see some of his ideas replicated on a UK-wide basis.
Well, we all agree on most things, such as Richard Leonard supported Labour's UK-wide manifesto at the 2017 general election. He was an enthusiastic supporter of a £10 an hour minimum wage, taking railways back into public ownership, ending car parking charge in hospitals, ending tuition fees
so what
and the
about
rest
his
of it.
idea for a one-off wealth tax, 1% of the total wealth of the richest 10% being paid in a one-off fee?
Well, that's a matter for the Scottish Labour Party.
No, I'm asking if you would like the same thing to be adopted on a UK-wide basis.
Well, our manifesto, by the way, isn't decided by shadow cabinet members making declarations on the Sunday politics.
But you're allowed a view, I think.
Well, we have a collective view. Our manifesto at the last general election, our very successful manifesto, was reached on a consensus basis, not only with the shadow cabinet and the Parliamentary Labour Party, but with members the length and breadth of the country. We're now the biggest political party in Western Europe. So it wouldn't be for me to be making policy decisions live on air. We believe in the politics of consensus, the politics of collectivism, and we'll be taking that forward with our next manifesto.
Now, some of our viewers may not know that, as well as being a Labour MP, you also present a heavy metal show on your local radio station. So luckily, we've got a clip of it that we can listen to.
OK.
New album of Valentine is called Fear Those Who Fear Him. And it's so heavy, it feels painful to listen to in a good way. Let's see if you agree. This song is by Valentine. It's called An Apathetic Grave.
So clearly you're a big heavy metal fan. Now, Jeremy Corbyn told the NME that he listens to everything from Mahler to Andean pipe music, but he's never mentioned heavy metal. Can you introduce him to some of your favourite tracks?
I could do. I mean, Jeremy's been on the front page of Kerrang, which was good. And what I thought was really nice in the interview in Kerrang, when the heavy metal fans were interviewing him, he didn't pretend to like heavy metal. He doesn't like it. It's not his thing. And it's good he said that. Far more refreshing than when David Cameron used to pretend to like the Smiths.
Richard Burton, thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much.
You didn't, frankly, have the balls to put country before party.